Throughout history, we've been taught that real power belonged to kings. Queens, they were just consorts, decorations on thrones, women who married well and looked pretty. But here's the truth they didn't want you to know. Some of the most brilliant, ruthless, and effective rulers in human history were women who needed no king beside them. They conquered nations, commanded armies, outsmarted empires, and ruled with an iron fist, all while history books tried to erase them or minimize their achievements. Today, we're exposing 10 queens who ruled without kings, whose stories were deliberately obscured because they threatened the narrative that only men could wield absolute power. First up, Queen Zinga of Ndongo and Matamba. In the 1600s, while European powers were colonizing Africa, one woman stood in their way for over 30 years. Queen Nzinga was a military genius, a master diplomat, and absolutely terrifying to the Portuguese who tried to conquer her kingdom in what's now Angola. She led her own troops into battle well into her 60s, personally commanded military strategy, and once in one of history's greatest power moves, when Portuguese negotiators refused to give her a chair during treaty talks, forcing her to stand while they sat, a deliberate insult, she ordered one of her servants to get on all fours and used him as a human throne. The message was clear: I am a queen, I bow to no one. Nzinga spent decades fighting Portuguese colonization, formed strategic alliances, switched religions when it benefited her politically, and died unconquered at age 82. Yet most history books barely mention her. Why? Because acknowledging a black African woman who outsmarted European empires for 3 decades destroys too many comfortable narratives. If you're already hooked, I need your help right now. People keep telling me this channel will never reach 1 million subscribers. They say historical content can't go viral. Prove them wrong. Hit that subscribe button. We're building an army of people who refuse to let history be erased. Join us. Number 2. Hatshepsut of ancient Egypt. The pharaoh who literally had to dress as a man because the idea of a woman ruling was so threatening that she couldn't rule as herself. Hatshepsut came to power around 1478 BCE as regent for her young stepson, but she didn't stay in the background for long. She declared herself pharaoh, not queen, pharaoh, and ruled Egypt for over 20 years during one of its most prosperous periods. She launched successful military campaigns, established lucrative trade routes, and commissioned massive building projects, including her stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. But here's where it gets wild. To legitimize her rule in a society that expected pharaohs to be male, Hatshepsut had herself depicted in official art, wearing the false beard of kingship and the male pharaonic regalia. She ruled as a king, not a queen, because that was the only way the power structure would accept her authority. After her death, her stepson, Thutmose III, and later rulers tried to erase her from history completely. They chiseled her name off monuments, destroyed her statues, and removed her from the official king lists. For thousands of years, Hatshepsut was nearly lost to history. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists began piecing together evidence of her reign. Why the erasure? Because she proved that a woman could be pharaoh, and that threatened the entire gender hierarchy of ancient Egypt. If one woman could rule successfully without a husband beside her, what did that say about the natural order of male dominance? So they tried to delete her entirely. They almost succeeded. But Hatshepsut's legacy was too monumental to completely destroy. She remains one of ancient Egypt's most successful pharaohs, and history tried to pretend she never existed. Number 3 takes us to China, where Wu Zetian became the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right. Not empress through marriage, emperor. Wu Zetian's rise to power reads like a thriller. She started as a concubine to Emperor Taizong, then after his death married his son, Emperor Gaozong. When Gaozong suffered a stroke, Wu effectively ruled through him. After his death in 683, she ruled through her sons for a few years before saying, "Enough of this pretense," and in 690 declared herself emperor of a new dynasty. She ruled until she was 82. During her reign, China prospered. She promoted capable officials based on merit rather than aristocratic birth, expanded the empire's territory, commissioned massive public works projects, and supported Buddhism and the arts. She was also ruthless. She had rivals executed, used secret police, and allegedly even ordered the deaths of her own children who threatened her power. Traditional Chinese historians portrayed her as a monster, a cautionary tale of what happens when women seize power, but modern analysis shows she was no more ruthless than male emperors. She just couldn't get away with the same behavior without being demonized. After her death, the dynasty she founded was erased, and she was written out of the official imperial succession. Chinese history books for centuries portrayed her as an aberration, a usurper, a woman who disrupted the natural order. The message was clear: this can never happen again. Women should never hold supreme power. But Wu Zetian did hold it, for over 4 decades, and she wielded it brilliantly. 3 queens in, and already your view of history is changing, isn't it? This is why this channel exists. But algorithms don't promote truth. They promote what's popular. Make this popular. Subscribe right now. Share this video. Leave a comment with your favorite queen so far. Let's prove that channels telling women's untold stories can reach 1 million subscribers. Don't just watch, participate. Number 4. Queen Tamar of Georgia, who ruled in the 12th century and was so powerful that she was officially titled King Tamar. Not queen, king. Tamar inherited the throne of the Kingdom of Georgia in 1184 and ruled until 1213, presiding over what Georgians call their Golden Age. She expanded the kingdom's territory through military conquest, crushed internal rebellions, patronized arts and literature, and established Georgia as a major power in the Caucasus region. Georgian chronicles refer to her reign as a time when the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. She led military campaigns, made strategic marriages, and annulled one when her husband proved incompetent, appointed capable generals, and doubled the size of her kingdom. She was celebrated as a warrior queen, a pious Christian, and a wise ruler. Because Western European history largely ignored Eastern European and Caucasian history, unless it involved fighting Muslims or being invaded by Mongols. Tamar's story doesn't fit the medieval European narrative where women were damsels or saints, not warrior kings who expanded empires. Even the title King Tamar has been lost in translation. Most Western sources demote her to queen, diminishing her unique status. In Georgia, she's a national hero, depicted on currency and celebrated in epic poetry. To the rest of the world, she's barely a footnote. That's not an accident. That's erasure through omission. If we only teach the histories of Western Europe, we can maintain the lie that women never wielded real power. Number 5 brings us to Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, who nearly brought the Roman Empire to its knees in the 3rd century CE. After her husband was assassinated, Zenobia became regent for her young son and immediately showed she had no intention of being a passive placeholder. Within a few years, she had conquered Egypt, much of modern Turkey, and large parts of the Levant, establishing the Palmyrene Empire that controlled a massive chunk of Rome's eastern territories and crucial trade routes. She declared herself Augusta, Empress, and her son Augustus, Emperor, directly challenging Roman authority. Roman sources describe her as beautiful and wise, then immediately undermine those compliments by expressing shock that a woman could be a military strategist and political leader. The historian Historia Augusta writes that she was more brave than her husband and ruled in the place of a man, as if competence and courage were inherently masculine traits. It took Emperor Aurelian himself to finally defeat Zenobia after years of warfare. When she was captured in 272 CE, Rome paraded her through the streets in golden chains as a humiliated captive, but even this was a backhanded acknowledgement of her threat. You don't parade minor enemies through Rome, you parade those who actually frightened you. After Zenobia, Roman sources had to grapple with an uncomfortable truth: a woman had nearly defeated them. Their solution? Minimize her, sexualize her, portray her as an exotic Eastern temptress, rather than the brilliant military and political leader she was. Later historians largely followed suit, but the archaeological evidence of her reign, the coins bearing her image, the inscriptions declaring her Augusta, the vast territory she controlled, tells a different story. Zenobia was Rome's equal, and Rome had to destroy her memory because they couldn't destroy her legacy. Number 6 takes us to 19th century India. Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, who fought the British Empire with such ferocity, that British soldiers called her the most dangerous of all rebel leaders. During the 1857 Indian Rebellion, Lakshmi Bai became Rani, Queen of Jhansi, through marriage. But when her husband died and the British tried to annex her state under the doctrine of lapse, she refused to surrender. When the rebellion broke out, she led her forces personally, riding into battle with her adopted son tied to her back, wielding a sword in each hand. British accounts describe her leading cavalry charges, defending her fortress, and showing military brilliance that rivaled their own commanders. She died in battle in 1858, fighting to her last breath. After her death, British colonial histories faced a problem. How do you admit that an Indian woman nearly defeated your superior forces? Their solution was to romanticize her as a tragic figure, a noble enemy, an exotic warrior princess, anything to avoid saying she was a brilliant military commander who exposed weaknesses in British strategy. In India, she's a national hero, celebrated as a symbol of resistance. In British history, she's a footnote, if mentioned at all. Why? Because acknowledging that colonized women could be military geniuses who nearly drove out the British Empire undermines the entire colonial narrative of British superiority and the civilizing mission. Lakshmi Bai's story proves that resistance was powerful, strategic, and often led by women, a truth that colonial and post-colonial histories tried desperately to hide. 6 powerful women who changed history, and you probably hadn't heard of half of them. That's deliberate erasure, and it's exactly why we need to grow this channel. If we hit 1 million subscribers, we can tell these stories to millions more people. But I can't do it without you. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this with everyone who loves untold history. Let's make this the biggest history channel that refuses to erase women. Prove the doubters wrong. Number 7. Empress Theodora of Byzantium, who rose from actress and dancer, professions considered disreputable in 6th century Constantinople, to become co-ruler of the Byzantine Empire and literally save it from collapse. Theodora married Emperor Justinian I, but she was no decorative consort. She was his political partner, advisor, and in many ways his superior in political acumen. In 532 CE, when the Nika riots nearly overthrew Justinian, and he was ready to flee Constantinople, it was Theodora who delivered the speech that changed history. According to the historian Procopius, she said, "Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Never will I see the day when I am not saluted as empress." She shamed the men into staying and fighting. Her strategy saved the empire. During her reign as empress, Theodora championed women's rights, passed laws against forced prostitution, created safe houses for women escaping sex work, and expanded women's property and divorce rights, radical reforms for the 6th century. She influenced religious policy, foreign relations, and governmental appointments. Yet historical accounts of Theodora are deeply split. Official sources praise her wisdom and partnership with Justinian, but Procopius also wrote a secret history, published after Theodora's death, that portrays her as a promiscuous schemer who manipulated Justinian. Modern historians debate whether this secret history was truth or character assassination by a misogynist who couldn't accept that a former actress could wield real power. What's not debatable is that Theodora saved the Byzantine Empire and left it more just than she found it. But because she was a woman from a shameful background who dared to wield power equal to an emperor, history tried to destroy her reputation, even as it couldn't deny her achievements. Number 8 brings us to Queen Nanny of the Maroons in 18th century Jamaica, a formerly enslaved woman who became a military genius and founded a free black community that the British couldn't defeat. After escaping slavery, Nanny led the Windward Maroons in guerrilla warfare against British colonial forces for decades. She used the mountainous terrain of Jamaica to her advantage, establishing settlements in locations the British couldn't reach. She trained warriors in guerrilla tactics, used her knowledge of herbal medicine to keep her people healthy, and according to legend, possessed spiritual powers that allowed her to catch British bullets and turn them back on the enemy. Whether literal or metaphorical, this speaks to how formidable she was. British soldiers believed she had supernatural powers because they couldn't explain how this woman kept defeating their trained military forces. In 1740, the British were finally forced to sign a peace treaty with the Maroons, granting them autonomy and land, a recognition of Nanny's military success. She's now a national hero of Jamaica, honored on currency and in monuments. But British colonial histories barely mention her, and when they do, they minimize her military leadership and focus instead on vague references to Maroon resistance. Why? Because Queen Nanny represents everything that terrified colonial powers. An enslaved black woman who not only freed herself, but freed hundreds of others, established an autonomous society, and militarily defeated one of the world's great empires. Her story destroys narratives of enslaved passivity and European invincibility. So British history tried to forget her. Jamaica never did. Number 9 takes us back to ancient times. Queen Amanirenas of Kush, who fought Rome to a standstill in the 1st century BCE and forced them to negotiate peace as equals, something almost no one achieved against the Roman Empire. When Roman Emperor Augustus tried to expand into Nubian territory, modern-day Sudan, Queen Amanirenas wasn't having it. She led a military campaign that pushed Roman forces out of Nubian lands, sacked Roman cities, and even captured statues of Augustus himself, one of which was found buried under the entrance to her palace, so people would walk on the emperor's face. When Rome retaliated, Amanirenas fought them to a stalemate for 5 years. Finally, Augustus negotiated a peace treaty where Rome withdrew from Kushite territory and waived tribute payments. This was almost unprecedented. Rome, the superpower that conquered most of the known world, backed down to an African queen. The few references that exist portray the conflict as a minor border skirmish, rather than the humiliating defeat it was. Why? Because admitting that a black African woman forced Rome to retreat undermined their entire imperial ideology. So they minimized it, obscured it, and allowed it to fade from historical memory. But archaeological evidence tells the true story. Amanirenas' kingdom prospered, Rome stayed out, and the queen who stared down an empire died undefeated. 9 queens, 9 women who changed history. 9 stories you probably never heard in school. This is what we're fighting for, making sure these stories reach everyone. But YouTube's algorithm buries content like this, unless you engage. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like this video. Comment Queen Amanirenas so the algorithm knows this matters. We're so close to 1 million subscribers. Don't let the doubters be right. Make history with us. Finally, number 10. Queen Cleopatra VII of Egypt, whose real story was buried under centuries of propaganda, portraying her as a seductress who used beauty rather than brains. Here's the truth. Cleopatra was one of the most educated rulers of her time. She spoke 9 languages fluently when most rulers spoke 1. She was a skilled mathematician, philosopher, and naval commander. She ruled Egypt for 21 years, maintained its independence during a time when Rome was conquering the Mediterranean world, and allied with Roman leaders as an equal partner, not a subordinate. The famous relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, political alliances between sovereign rulers, not romantic flings. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, and presented him as Caesar's heir, threatening Octavian's claim to power. With Antony, she formed a political and military partnership that challenged Rome's expansion. When Octavian finally defeated them, he faced a propaganda problem. How do you justify destroying a foreign queen who was Rome's equal? Simple. You portray her as a temptress who seduced and corrupted good Roman men, as a foreign threat to Roman virtue, as a woman who used sexuality rather than intelligence. Roman propaganda painted Cleopatra as the opposite of the virtuous Roman matron. Exotic, dangerous, sexually manipulative. And that's the Cleopatra that history remembered. Shakespeare reinforced it. Hollywood ran with it. Elizabeth Taylor immortalized it. But the real Cleopatra, the polyglot scholar, the naval commander, the political strategist who kept Egypt independent for 2 decades against the greatest empire in the world, that Cleopatra was buried under the myth. Why? Because powerful, intelligent women who use political acumen and military strategy are threatening. Seductresses are manageable. Scholars and strategists who challenge empires must be destroyed, if not in life, then in memory. For 2,000 years it worked. but now we know better. These 10 queens, Nzinga, Hatshepsut, Wu Zetium, Tamar, Zenobia, Lakshmibai, Theodora, Mani, Amanirenas and Cleopatra, ruled without kings. They commanded armies, conquered territories, saved empires, defeated superpowers, and changed history. And history tried to erase them because they proved that women could wield absolute power. But we're writing them back in, we're telling their stories, we're making sure that every person who watches this video knows that queens ruled without kings, and they ruled brilliantly. This is it. You've just learned about 10 queens who changed the world. Don't let their stories stop here. Subscribe to this channel right now. We're on a mission to reach 1 million subscribers and prove that untold histories matter to millions of people. Share this video everywhere. Social media, group chats, with your friends who love history. Leave a comment telling us which queen you want to learn more about. Hit that like button so YouTube knows this content deserves to go viral. Together we're rewriting history and making sure these queens and countless others are never forgotten again. The doubters said we couldn't grow. Let's prove them spectacularly wrong. Subscribe, engage, share. Make this the moment we changed everything. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for joining this movement. These queens ruled without kings, and we're building a community that doesn't need permission to tell the truth. Let's go. Remember, history isn't what happened, it's what we choose to remember. And we choose to remember these queens. Good night, and may you rule your own kingdom with the courage and brilliance of the women you've met tonight.